Welcome to Straits Talk, a podcast by Straits Interactive, where we talk about the value, risks, and constraints of data protection, data governance, and generative AI. I'm tech writer Grace Chung, and this is the second season of our podcast. With me is Kevin Shepherdson, founder and CEO of Straits Interactive, and good friends Harish Pillay from AI Verify Foundation, Singapore, and Dr. P, who is the Dean School of Law at the University of the Thai Chamber of Commerce, and advisor to Secretary General of the Personal Data Protection Committee of Thailand. So welcome, Harish and Dr. P. You know, today, the headlines in all the media is Gen AI and AI everywhere. So it's all becoming ubiquitous. I think it is important that businesses and government understand where AI is coming from, right, Kevin?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole thinking here is everyone is reading about all the negative aspects, the risks, the constraints, the incidents, the deepfakes. But I think we should also look at the value of how Gen AI, or what value Gen AI can bring, obviously balancing it against the risks and the constraints.
Yeah, so I thought that we could get a quick understanding of what ASEAN nations are doing, especially businesses and government, on regulations. Dr. P, you are the expert in this area. Can you tell us a little bit more about the EU AI Act?
Yes, of course. Well, I think by this point, everybody knows that the EU AI Act presents the sort of like a role model for the subsequent similar acts to come, because the AI Act will be the EU AI Act will be the first compulsory regulation for any company that want to provide services in the EU, and that's so important because it imposes the risk-based approach to the regulation. I think many guidelines in many jurisdictions now are following the risk-based approach on those EU AI Acts. I can give you example of my country. Thailand just launched in 2022 the AI standards guidelines. Although it's only voluntary, but it also presents the model for businesses and agencies to take the risk-based approach as well. So I think we are beginning to see the trend towards the role model that the EU AI Act represents.
Harish, can you tell us a little bit more about what Singapore is doing as far as, AI regulations are concerned?
I can't speak for regulations per se, but what has happened here is we have an organization called AI Verify Foundation that was established in the middle of last year. The idea here is to be able to have voluntary testing of AI solutions to make sure that it is either fair, is unbiased, and is transparent. And it's about 11 criteria that needs to be tested against. So at least if you have some means to be prescriptive in testing something, showing that these are my test inputs and these are my test outputs as expected. If it's not as expected, go back and fix it. So that regime is what we have created today, and it needs to grow a lot more. But that's really where we are not from a regulation perspective, but from a tools perspective, so that people can take that and do something with it.
I think Singapore is proceeding along the lines of guidelines, right? They are not saying that we want to regulate this AI. So, Kevin, in terms of governance, what are the things that businesses need to be aware of?
I think there's a very important framework introduced by IMDA called the AI Model Governance Framework. And I think recently there's also one specific framework for generative AI. Yeah. Now all these they are not regulations. They are guidelines for organizations to follow from an operational perspective. So what companies can do is to refer to these documents as an operational guideline in terms of rolling out their AI systems. I just want to point out to the fact that Singapore is adopting a friendly approach. I believe Harish, you would agree to that. But I'm almost certain that when you start to see incidents and breaches happening, perhaps that posture might change, right? But we do know that the EU AI Act is going to impact countries around the world.
Just like GDPR, right?
It does.
Yeah.
So exactly. And maybe Dr. P, you can comment on the extraterritorial applicability of the EU Act, and just as how the GDPR has impacted countries around the world. Maybe Dr. P, what is your take?
Yes, of course. I think it's quite impactful because, well, if you are a company in Singapore or if you are a company in Thailand, but you have the intention to provide a service in the EU, you are under the auspices of the AI Act. That's why it's so, because you have to get ready for all of the obligations that you need to be doing in order to comply with the EU AI Act.
I think this is the challenge that there is, right? Because when you have to do that, because I need to comply to a particular jurisdiction, so it's not technically territorial kind of stuff, but because I'm doing business in that territory, I need to comply to that, which is what everybody has to do nonetheless. But I think the bigger problem will be an organization is doing that, also having, are you going to have two different versions of compliance?
Yeah.
And then I think that becomes a cost issue and a whole bunch of other things that comes into the play. So I can't have one for EU only and another one for the rest of EU. I mean, outside EU.
Yeah.
So that will be a huge challenge.
So that's one challenge. So what are the challenges, especially for small companies who are trying to export their services overseas?
I think if you look at it purely from a perspective of privacy, we can't be prescribing for every single situation, right? Where a software application, business process has got, could be privacy intrusive, right? And there we have a data protection law that governs how the data is collected, used, disclosed, and stored. But in the area of AI, I think there are what we call AI ethical principles. Things like transparency, accountability, all of these principles are principles that organizations can potentially follow, right? I think we hear about the concerns of biasness, security. The same issues here are issues that companies should be conscious about. And we look at all of the laws, including the EU AI Act. What underpins all of them will be the same the same AI ethical principles.
Right.
So it's for them to be educated. We used to worry about privacy and security. Now we worry about biasness, discrimination.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it is an interesting scenario we are in. I'd be thinking it from a meta perspective. We need an AI tool to see my solution. Does it fit into the EU AI plus the California Privacy Act, GDPR, our PDPA, and the whole host of other stuff. So somebody else has to think to the meta level to give you guidance. So small SMEs, maybe that's an area that SMEs need help in, because otherwise they won't know where they are heading to, and everybody's going to be lost.
And yeah, ISO standards, you can actually
ISO standards,
right? Yeah, that especially underpinning the AI ethical principles.
Yeah. Dr. P, coming in from following up from that discussion, do you think that beneficial for ASEAN as a group to have an ASEAN guidelines on AI, so that, as a group we follow the same, and that's how we will then approach the world with our services?
Yes, of course. It will be very beneficial. In fact, early this year, actually, the ASEAN Secretariat just launched the ASEAN Guide on the AI Governance and Ethics just early this year. And it just follows a lot of the requirements from not only the EU AI Act, but other guidelines from around the world. But it's still voluntary. So that will be the first step for the ASEAN member states to actually follow. Maybe the next step, like I think I could echo with Harish and Kevin mentioned about the small businesses. I think resources are important, but resources can come in many forms, not only financially, but I think some sort of like a set of standards or the documents that are very easy to digest that could come from the government for the SMEs to actually take this resource and, have the common understanding. I think also very importantly, privacy by design. So if we can encourage that with the small businesses to actually think first on how the output is going to be, and you just put in the design on the process, there will be privacy by design, but it also resonates with the AI by design as well. That could ease in a lot of process, especially for the small businesses, looking at the fact that they have to actually look at different regulations from different jurisdictions.
I just want to add that if we're going to talk about small businesses, their first experience to AI will be in the area of generative.
Yeah,
very much. Yeah,
and as you know, the encounters will be on ChatGPT and all of these very basic experience of what Gen AI is all about. And I found one document very useful from PDPC. I think many people may not be aware. It's called the Advisory Guidelines on the Use of Personal Data in AI Recommendation and Decision Systems. So I would ask businesses to actually refer to this document. And if I could just cite certain ISO documents that could be useful for everyone, I think one important one is the ISO 42001. I think this is a framework for organizations to establish and maintain an AI management system within their organization. And another one which could be useful to everyone would be the ISO. This is also a very interesting one, 23894. It's actually a risk management a guide for AI applications. So while we don't have regulations here, and while the EU AI Act is a good reference, but that's outside of Singapore, and operational guidelines and these best practice industry standards would be something that businesses can use. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. P and Harish and Kevin. So I think we can take away a couple of points from here. Government has a role to play, obviously, especially for small businesses. Big companies usually can take care of themselves. So for small business, government has a role to play. Make the guidelines simple, maybe a one-pager where they can follow. Then encourage AI policy by design. So encourage SMEs to use this strategy, this approach when they're designing their products and solutions. And then there are already guidelines that are available. Kevin mentioned the IMDA AI guidelines and the ISO 42001 and 23894. I don't know how you remember all these numbers, but these ISO guidelines are available. I think they'll be available in the show notes for our listeners. Well, thank you for listening to us. Until the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.